Dear friends, English literature, Elizabethan and Jacobean drama, Macbeth by William Shakespeare, short questions with answers, short questions 20 to 30. Question 20. Explain how the apparition's prophecies are fulfilled. Answer. The first apparition is of Macduff, armed and warning Macbeth. This comes to happen at the end when Macbeth meets his end at Macduff's hand. Another apparition is of a bloody child who reveals the prophecy that none of a woman born will harm Macbeth. This comes true for young Seward Battlesome and is killed. However, Macduff is a woman born and succeeds in killing Macbeth. Thirdly, a child crowned and holding a tree warns Macbeth that he will not see his demise unless when Birnam Wood comes against him. This happens, however, when Malcolm's soldiers use wood as camouflage, march to Macbeth's castle, where he is killed. Question 21. What is soliloquy? Answer. Soliloquy is a kind of dialogue with the self. Etymologically, it means speaking while one is alone. When a character alone on the stage is speaking aloud, he is making a soliloquy. Soliloquy is different from an aside. An aside is a speech made by a character privately to himself where others are present, while a soliloquy is a speech which a character makes to himself when he is all alone. A character in a drama often expresses his most secret thoughts and designs in a soliloquy. An aside is also an expression of a character's secret thoughts and feelings. The soliloquy was a device or convention used in Elizabethan drama as a means of supplying information regarding the plot, as well as means of revealing the secret thoughts of character. The assumption was that the soliloquizer was talking to himself, although in actual fact he was addressing the audience. Shakespeare used soliloquies both in his comedies and in his tragedies because the soliloquy may produce a comic or tragic effect. The variety of purposes for which Shakespeare utilized the soliloquy is really remarkable. The principal purposes for which he used it are, of course, to advance the story or the plot, and to reveal the secret working of the mind of a character. The soliloquy is thus important both as regard plot development and character revelation. There are quite a number of soliloquies in the play Macbeth. Most of these are made by Macbeth himself, but there are a few by Lady Macbeth, and a couple of brief ones by Banquo and Lady Macbeth. Question 22. Write in brief the significance of Macbeth's soliloquies. Answer. We have a large number of soliloquies in Macbeth. One of the most important of Macbeth's soliloquies is made when King Duncan has arrived at Macbeth's castle to stay there as a guest. This soliloquy shows his reflections on the consequences of the murder. Macbeth makes his another soliloquy when he is about to murder sleeping Duncan. Here he uses a bloody dagger, which is actually a hallucination, an expression of his guilty mind. In his next soliloquy, after committing the murder of Duncan, he is completely overwhelmed by the sense of guilt. There are two brief soliloquies which Macbeth makes on the battlefield before he is killed. In one, he compares himself to a trapped animal, a bear tried to stake and baited by dogs. In the other soliloquy, he expresses the determination to go ahead and fight and not kill himself. But in the ensuing duel with Macduff, he is killed. Thus, Shakespeare uses soliloquies to reveal the inner state of character. Question 23. How is Macbeth different from classical tragedy? Answer. A classical tragedy is the story of a hero or heroine who experiences a reversal of fortune set in motion by the gods as a result of hubris. A Shakespearean tragedy tells the story of a seemingly heroic figure whose major character flaw causes the story to end with his tragic downfall. In a classical tragedy, emphasis is given on fate or destiny. Fate plays a crucial role to bring about the downfall of the hero. But in Shakespearean tragedy, the entire emphasis is given on the responsibility of the hero. In a classical tragedy, tragic flaw is conditioned by destiny, but in Macbeth, destiny plays no role. Macbeth himself is responsible for his tragic flaw of time, fate, and action. In Macbeth, though Shakespeare observes in matter of structure, classical tragedy strictly observe the unity of time, action. He does not mention the unities of time and place. Classical tragedies employ the chorus as a dramatic device. In Macbeth, there is complete absence of the chorus. But whereas in classical drama, the chorus offers time gaps between the two sets of tragic actions. In a play of Shakespeare, this is achieved by comic relief. An ideal example is the Porter scene in Macbeth. Finally, the introduction of ghosts, witches, strange visions, and fearful phenomena. That is the Deus ex machina, which is so rampant in Macbeth, is never made use of Greek tragedies. Question 24. What is dramatic irony? Answer. Dramatic irony is a literary device which reveals the contrast between what the audience knows and the character thinks he knows. It consists in the contrast between the two aspects of the same remarks or situation. A remark made by character in the play may have one meaning for him and another meaning for some of the other characters and for the audience. It may have one meaning for the speaker and some other characters and another meaning for the audience. Similarly, a situation in a play may have double significance in the sense that a disaster may be foreseen by the audience while the characters concerned are ignorant of it. Sophocles masterly uses the technique of dramatic irony in King Oedipus, in which Oedipus unknowingly kills his father and marries his mother. Shakespeare presents it in his Troilus and Cressida and is in Macbeth. Question 25. How does Shakespeare use the technique of dramatic irony in Macbeth? Answer. In Macbeth, Shakespeare uses dramatic irony to deepen tragic effect or the tragic atmosphere. In the play, we find that Duncan praises Macbeth. He describes Macbeth's castle as a pleasant seat, but there he has to face his tragic doom. The words of Lady Macbeth to her husband after the murder of Duncan are, "A little water clears us of the deed," but in the sleepwalking scene, she says that all the waters of the ocean cannot remove the stain of blood from her hand. Dramatic irony also lies in the promises and assurances of the witches given to Macbeth, who realizes too late the ambiguity and the equivocation in which the witches have said to him. Thus, Shakespeare uses dramatic irony to show the darkness of the characters and to show the stages of guilt and the changing of Macbeth from honorable man to traitor. In the end, everything that Macbeth had fought for had turned on him. He was haunted by his actions. Finally, the punishments that he had all ordered for others were doled out to him in return for his horrific deeds because of his shift to a more evil version of what he had been. Question 26. What is supernatural? Answer. Supernaturalism is something that is above and beyond what is natural. It implies events which cannot be directly explained by known laws and observations. Through the ages, phenomena which could not be explained by the familiar laws of nature have been attributed to supernatural powers and influences. If these happenings led to the happiness of man, they were attributed to benevolent powers. If, on the contrary, they resulted in suffering and misery, they were ascribed to evil spirits. Literature has continuously been enriched by stories in which the supernatural plays an important part. The desire to hear about the miraculous is as strong in the civilized man as it was in the primitive ancestors, as it is in the naive child. The folklores of all ages and countries around abound with tales of magic, fairies, spirits, gods, and demons. Question 27. What supernatural element do you find in Macbeth or Macbeth? Answer. In Macbeth, the supernatural is an integral part of the structure of the plot. It provides a catalyst for action, an insight into character, and argument to the impact of many key scenes. There are a number of supernatural elements in Macbeth. Number one, the play opens with a meeting of the witches who make to Macbeth and Banquo certain prophecies which provide the necessary momentum for the action of the play. Number two, the ghost of Banquo appears at the banquet scene and occupies the seat intended for Macbeth. The ghost helps in the disclosure of Macbeth's crime and the development of the plot. Number three, there are a number of portents, such as the shaking of the earth, a mouse killing a falcon, and Duncan's horses eating each other, serves to emphasize the unnaturalness of Macbeth's deed in murdering Duncan. 1 to B. Number 5. Finally, the English king, Edward the Confessor, is reported to have the power of curing an incurable disease, and he has also the gift of prophecy. The purpose of mentioning these supernatural powers is to establish a contrast between the wickedness of Macbeth and goodness of King Edward. Thus, Shakespeare handles the supernatural elements because each of the instances cause action or are the result of an action. Without these supernatural elements, Macbeth would have been a dull and tiresome play. Question 28. What is dramatic relief? Answer. Dramatic relief or comic relief is a literary technique employed by the dramatist in the construction of drama in order to provide relief from emotional tension or intensity and to heighten the seriousness of the story. This type of scene is comic or humorous. When intersection in a play agitates and excites the spectators to a degree that the strain becomes unbearable, the dramatist puts in scenes on actions which help to relieve the tension. The scenes intended for dramatic relief have a number of functions to perform. They add variety to the action of the play and help it not to be dull and monotonous. They provide emotional relief for the spectators and enhance the entertainment offered by the play. They also add to the intensity of the impression of events before and after them. Question 29. Give examples of dramatic relief used in Macbeth. Answer. A Shakespearean tragedy is a story of horrid piled on horror's head. Hence, the dramatist provides comic relief to lessen the tension of the audience's mind whenever art demands it. Number one, the most striking example of dramatic irony in Macbeth is certainly the drunken porter's speech, in which the porter imagines himself to be the keeper of the Hellgate, ironically unconscious that he is so indeed. It follows the breathtaking and awe-inspiring scene of Duncan's murder, which marks the crisis in the play. Number two, another example of dramatic relief is the scene where Duncan and Banquo speak of the calm and serene atmosphere of Macbeth's castle. The scene lowers the emotional tension of the audience after the tumult that precedes and before the horror that follows. 3. The humorous dialogue of the old man and Roses in Act 2, Scene 4, and of Lennox and another lord in Act 3, Scene 6, is also used to serve the purpose of dramatic relief. Number 4. The scene where the little child of Macduff prattles with his mother just before their murder provides a comic relief against the dark background of the brutality committed by the hired murderers of Macbeth. 5. The dialogue between Macduff and Malcolm in Act 4, Scene 2 also provides a good deal of relief to the emotion of the audience. Question 30. All the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten his little hand. Who says this and why? Answer. This is said by Lady Macbeth in Act 5, Scene 1 of William Shakespeare's great tragedy Macbeth. Here, Lady Macbeth describes her mood of despair. Lady Macbeth said this in her sleepwalking. She is talking incoherently while waking in her sleep. She seems to have found a spot of blood on her hand. She is trying to wash it clean, but she cannot wipe it out in spite of her best attempts. She cannot get rid of the smell of blood which offends her delicate sense. She wants to remove the smell of blood by perfumes of Arabia, which was the fabled home of perfumes. But she says that all the perfumes brought from Arabia would not be able to impart fragrance to her little feminine hands. Here the contrast between all the perfumes and a little hand is worth noting. Thus the line is ironical. Lady Macbeth said on the night of murder, a little water clears off of the deed. The stain of blood is the stain of guilt which cannot be wiped out. Thank you friends for watching my video.